The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
A relaxing dip in a natural hot spring? The perfect end to a great vacation, right? But luck can change in a hurry.
I could feel that hot, bubbling, and acidic mud essentially just burning through my skin.
And when you're stuck, you hope someone's there to help you get out.
She can lose blood pressure. She can lose her pulse. I was like, not okay. You're not going to die here.
Search for Tell Me What Happened, an original podcast by OnStar, to hear true stories about people who take risks to help others.
You're done.
I'm done.
Okay.
We've got 9 weeks to go and I got nothing. No content.
No, my hi, my. This is Gone by Lunchtime. I'm going to tell you what time it is. The time is just after 10 o'clock on Tuesday, July 21. And I really have to do that because it seems like now every podcast is an emergency podcast. Like the news pinata is just exploding all over us all the time. Thank you very much to Flick Electric for making this happen. Thank you to Jane Yee, who's stepping into the producer seat today.
Hopefully she makes it through the entire episode.
She's
like Miss Tiller.
Well, that's true. Tina, I think, is resigned in protest at Ben and Annabelle's statements. Jane, meanwhile, has lit a candle on the producer's desk and already close to set the whole studio on fire. Annabelle Lee Mather is here. Thanks for coming in, Annabelle.
Kia ora.
Ben Thomas is here. He's had a COVID test.
It was it was much more invasive than I thought it would be.
Oh.
Yeah.
But everywhere it says it's invasive. How could you not have known that was the case?
I saw Ace RNZ reporter Charlotte Cook's video of her COVID test, and she made it look like a breeze. But then there was this thing like right up my nose, into my brain.
Yep.
Kind of
scraping little bits of brain out.
Yeah.
That's why you've run out of material. Like it got scraped off with the swab.
It's all in the swab. It's all in it. They're going
your
like
best material.
Yeah, ESR are going to test the swab, and they're going to go like, "Wow, we've got like 4 zingers in here," but we got 3 gags about the National Party caucus disintegrating. Send them on to the Director General for his daily briefing.
I think after what's happened, we were just discussing that maybe this is we should talk about STV, single transferable vote. I think that's the pressing issue on people's minds.
Definitely.
3 or 4 year term, I think, is something we need to give serious consideration to right now, today.
Look, 8 days ago.
Important to note that this podcast was recorded before Andrew Bailey held up a South Auckland liquor store on Tuesday afternoon. We're recording in the morning.
Yeah.
This was before
international MP's name, turned into cheese spontaneously on the high street of Whanganui. 8 days ago, ladies and gentlemen, the 3 most senior people in the National Party were 1, Todd Muller, 2, Nikki Kay, and 3, Amy Adams, and MP Andrew Falloon was best known for a tweet about a cat. This is the pace of the 2020 general election after a series of general elections that felt like pretty fast-running treadmills. This one is going in a similar direction. I don't know, where do we begin with all this, Annabelle? Basically, the first came to light was less than 24 hours ago. It was I just nipped out a little timeline here. It was 2:04 p.m. that a statement arrived in Falloon's name from the office of the Leader of the Opposition. And it foregrounded, some really serious issues around him having mental health issues and having had in his life a number of friends commit suicide. Really quite, serious and upsetting stuff. And then from there, there was a big hole in the statement. So Judith Collins also issued a statement. So it was a donut of a statement, and the middle was missing, and because there were apologies made for mistakes, but we didn't know anything about what those mistakes were. And then, inevitably, we began to learn over the course of the day what those were. They were that Falloon had sent pornographic images, unsolicited pornographic images, to a young woman, a teenage woman, first year of university, reportedly. And then we learned this morning that there's a second and a third woman who'd also received these images. And Judith Collins moved this morning in a round of media interviews to expedite his departure from Parliament, which originally had been just planned he was just going to hang out for the next few weeks quietly and pick up his salary. I don't know. What do you make of this? There is, I mean, we don't know. There's nothing that says that it's impossible to have serious mental health issues at the same time as behaving appallingly. You know, it's not like they can't happen together, but they're also separate. And we don't know all the details of this. So, but I do feel, part of me feels quite strongly that if the mental health problems, if mental illness has been used as a smokescreen, as a kind of human shield for attention being paid to political misbehaviour, that is completely reprehensible. That is unforgivably wrong.
Indeed. I'm impressed with the speed in which Judith Collins has acted to cauterise this particularly revolting weepy sore. I think, she was in a difficult position in that if someone does cite mental health issues, you do kind of have to give them the benefit of the doubt and go through a process. But clearly, as the information has come to hand, she has worked through that, and to push out a sitting electorate MP is no mean feat. She doesn't, I think legally, she doesn't have the ability to do that. You can only do that with list MPs. So that she was able to convince him to quit within 24 hours, I think, is commendable. I also think that, not long ago, most male leaders wouldn't have been able to resist the urge to drop this particular shit bomb in the media. So I think it's also commendable that Jacinda Ardern handled it the way she did, and I think it shows incredible integrity and discipline on her part. And it's the right thing to do. It's what we should expect from our politicians. But in this part of the election cycle, I think, others may not have followed suit, so good on her as well.
So just to fill in on the Prime Minister's office role in this, we learned yesterday over the course of the afternoon that the origin of the revelations, really, the correspondence, was in an email sent to the Prime Minister's office on Wednesday, as I understand it. That was when that was sort of processed properly. It was provided by the Prime Minister's office, by the Chief of Staff, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, to the National Party's Chief of Staff on Friday afternoon. That was in turn shared with Judith Collins on Saturday morning. And then she took action on Monday morning. But given she had, as far as we know, been the email, which included presumably the evidence, was it sufficient to foreground the mental health stuff and not did she act appropriately, Judith Collins, in your estimation, on the Monday afternoon?
Yeah, so I have quite strong feelings about the invocation of mental health in political scandals, I suppose, because we saw it with Jamie Lee Ross, where he sort of claimed that he was in sort of the stages of various mental health crises and incidents.
And he was. Look, he was committed to mental health.
Absolutely. And it can be both true that politics is a bruising environment, that there are parts of a toxic culture in Parliament, that politicians sometimes are under a lot of strain because of their own actions, and that this can lead to mental health issues. And that's distinct from mental health issues prompting poor behaviour. And it's distinct from mental health being an excuse for poor behaviour, whether you're under the influence of, mental health issues at the time, right? It's not this canard that you can evoke to escape any sense of culpability or responsibility. This is leading back to the Judith Collins' handling of it, which is that, in my estimation, we don't know what the victim, the receiver of the messages, wanted out of this. That hasn't been reported, as far as I know.
We do know that the Prime Minister's office checked with the sender before providing it on to the So my judgment would be that the appropriate response to finding out that your MP has done this is to get rid of them. Now, she did that. If at the same time he's under a lot of stress because, probably understandably, because, by mid-afternoon online he was being called a pedophile and, and subject to, a lot of, hatred, and probably a bit of it deserved. That, he was clearly, guilty of gross misconduct as an MP. And, and I don't think that it's contradictory to want to say, we need to look after these people while they're in the midst of these issues and take the appropriate steps, which is get them out of Parliament, get them removed from public life. I don't think that that's inappropriate. I think that's the same with, as with Jamie Lee Ross. It was appropriate to respect him, taking time out, getting treatment. It didn't excuse him at the same time going on to News Talk ZB and trying to smear and re-victimise people, spread leaks, that kind of thing. And I think in the same way, Jane is just holding us up to us as we speak, very helpfully, some breaking news, which is that Judith Collins is saying that she has spoken to the police about the two new allegations, which we've had this morning, one coming via Stuff and the other via News Hub about the second and third woman, and that the police have advised her office that they are likely to reopen investigation. That's been posted by Henry Cook of Stuff. So this is obviously a developing story, and what you're listening to is out of date. But hang on, Ben is not finished.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is I think it's totally legitimate to both respect people's, mental health crises brought about, in all likelihood by their own actions, at the same time as keep holding them accountable for the things that they have done. Holding them to account doesn't necessarily mean piling in and sticking in the boot at every opportunity. The penalty for poor conduct as an MP is that you are sacked or you are forced to resign. You give up your hefty pay, you give up your role in public life, you give up your status in society, you're made a pariah. These are pretty hefty penalties. And, as we've just seen from Henry Cook's tweet, the police may start to investigate as more matters come to light. So, and just for clarity, I don't think that reporters continuing to ask questions is putting the boot in any way. I think that that's their role and their job, and can lead to, more relevant information being disclosed. So, as I see it, we're seeing the system working right now.
That may well be, and we don't know what else might come to light. But what we also are looking at is what appears to be not just a pattern on the part of one MP, but you mentioned Jamie Lee Ross, who was, in the National Caucus, and the national. Was he front bench? Certainly, he was in a senior position. Yep. We had that Hamish Walker situation, which is a different sort of thing, but it also involves private patients' details. It's the kind of thing that should be clear to most clear-thinking people as beyond the pale. We've had other sort of associated. We've had Michael Woodhouse from years back holding up a toilet seat with Claire Curran's face on. Is there a culture problem? It's that old question. in the National Party? Is it in Parliament more generally? You know, this is a deeply concerning pattern of people behaving in ways that are unacceptable.
I think that if you're talking about inappropriate text messages, older men, particularly in positions of power, very generously misunderstanding or more likely abusing their relationship with younger women, I think that's a societal issue that I think shows up in Parliament as well. Parliament is predicated on hierarchies of power. Politics is all about the exercise of power, and so it shows up, you know, it shows up in the same way that it does in a company hierarchy, you know, as we've seen with big firms, as we've seen with, you know, a lot of these, you know, for want of a better word, patriarchal structures. I certainly don't. I mean, I know it's not confined to the National Party. I think, you know, everyone kind of knows that down in Wellington. But, you know, and I don't think that it's widespread in the sense that I think that parties in particular take a hard line on it these days and have done for some time. You know, nothing is going to sort of grind the party leadership or hierarchy into action faster than, you know, inappropriate messages, you know, wiener-esque pictures, you know, illicit liaisons with, you know, groupies or younger party members. And so I don't think it's right to characterise it as a National Party problem. It is a problem in Parliament, as it is a problem in society. And I think that the toxic culture thing is a bit of a what's the word? Whitewash? Red herring, in the sense that these are still individuals who are culpable for their actions, you know.
There's something, though, isn't there? There's something about people who, I mean, you think back to poor old Aaron Gilmore and his now what seems incredibly kind of almost innocent "Do you know who I am?" at a Hamner Springs restaurant. But it still, is it part of a general issue? And I'm not going to suggest it's, you know, specific to any particular party, although, you know, I mean, well, we just read out a list, but that there is just an issue with power and a sort of failure to understand the dignity of a public office, I suppose.
It's hard to remember the National Party being embroiled in so many micro scandals. Like I can't remember a time when there's been a run of so many individual MPs behaving very poorly for the position that they hold. And I do wonder if it's a reflection of the sort of demographic shift that we've seen within the party, where it used to be the kind of old blue school, you know, farmers and remuera and all of that sort of stuff. And now we've got this sort of young, ambitious generation coming through who perhaps don't have that kind of old school approach to politics.
It doesn't feel like the party of Jim
like the
Bolger,
vehicle.
does it?
No, it's a vehicle for the ambitious and upwardly mobile who don't necessarily have the discipline or the understanding or the self-awareness of what's required to be an MP.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. Both Walker and Falloon, you know, they had ties, you know, family ties and historical ties to their electorates, but they moved there to be MPs. They were very much sort of looking at, you know, they're both quite young. Falloon has only ever worked in Parliament and as an MP. You know, I think there's certainly something to that, and maybe you're right. Maybe in the sense that maybe it's the wrong fit, in the sense of, you know, those are two rural seats, but you've basically got two city guys coming in, and their goal is to be an MP, not necessarily to be part of the community. And so they've got all of these, you know, it's hard to imagine Ian McKelvey in Palmerston North, in, you know, Rangitikei, sending people, you know, pornographic images, you know, because he's you know, a farmer, salt of the earth kind of. I think it's interesting. On the other hand, you've got other, Labour is full of professional politicians as well. It's something that it's a trend that I don't particularly like. I think National have been following and have actually overtaken Labour in terms of former staffers becoming MPs, which I don't think you can necessarily connect to misconduct, but I think is a bad trend in general. I don't think that you should go straight from working in Parliament to being an MP.
It's a global one too, that professionalisation of politics idea, isn't it? That whether it's directly linked to this culture is another question. I mean, more broadly, we are.
I think you did see it with things like Todd Barclay, where Todd Barclay's natural habitat was Courtenay Place. It wasn't Clutha Southland. And he was much more interested in being in Courtenay Place than when he was at school prize givings.
Yeah.
The problem for Judith Collins is that, she's inherited a party in disarray just weeks out of the election, and every hour she has to spend cleaning up this mess and wading through the detail of it and talking to police and disciplining MPs is precious time that she's not strategising and building their election campaign. So it's a massive it's a problem for her in a very practical sense.
That's absolutely right. And I mean, let's remember that the last time we spoke, which was exactly a week ago, the acting leader of the National Party was Nikki Kaye. That's that's literally who was running the National Party at that point as they were preparing to go into their caucus meeting. So she's now had less than a week, and part of the whole idea was to draw a line. We kept on talking about drawing a line, right? And we were drawing a line under the allegations around Michelle Bogue and the leaked patient details, and Michael Woodhouse's receipt of some of those, and Hamish Walker obviously had to fall on his sword over that eventually after pressure was put on him. But now, again, as you say, Annabelle, it's the back foot. There are 14 MPs who have either quit this parliament or left the National Party, that 14th being Jamie Lee Ross. It's a bit of a shit show, and for Judith Collins as well, it doesn't help that in this case she's worked very hard over the weekend to answer questions when the dirty politics questions are raised. There's a whole chapter devoted to her in the book Dirty Politics, to be very clear that she won't accept any of this. And let's be clear. It's not all of this happened when she was nowhere near the leadership, right? So, but it still makes it. I mean, she can't draw. How can she draw a line under this? She's the latest information is she's saying that the police investigation might be reopened. She's already issued a statement through a spokesperson saying it shows a pattern, and she expects further allegations to come. I mean, this is now being on the back foot. What happens now, Ben? Do you see any way out of this for the National Party, or is it just trying to manage the horrors?
I'm trying to brainstorm a detailed sketch artist, who does kind of confusing sort of. I was going to say drawn so many lines now it looks like a Jackson Pollock painting, but of course he did splotches, not lines. Right. So the whole thing is just disintegrated.
Like a 3-year-old with a crayon drawing a line, maybe.
Yeah, something. Let's just fix this in post. I'll record a new gag and send it to you this afternoon. This is the thing. I mean, it's been a lifetime, and individually you look at a lot of these things. Totally reasonable that Nikki Kaye would decide to bow out. She's 40. She has a whole life ahead of her. She's done pretty much everything she'll do. She could do in politics except be prime minister or deputy prime minister. Heart wasn't really in it anymore. She can go and enjoy life. Fair enough. Amy Adams was already sort of, half out the door. Paula Bennett was probably always going to leave once she was removed from the leadership. Walker obviously had to go. Then Falloon, really I think it built out of the blue. And individually you look at all these things and say, well, that kind of makes sense. That's legitimate. And then when you put it all together, You know, it's this kind of ship of Theseus, but every plank has been replaced with shit.
Yeah, a lot of people were saying at the start of this term. I mean, we had a kind of a completely unfamiliar huge caucus that aren't in government, right? That don't have any role in government, and in a way, you could put some of this down to that. But this goes beyond even the kind of statistical expectation of a few sort of disenfranchised and disillusioned backbenchers.
And the problem that it creates is that, one of National's strongest lines of attack over the last 3 years has been the inexperience of Labour's ministers and MPs and looking like the party that's ready to govern. And with such a mass exodus, it makes it very difficult to be able to credibly continue to run that line.
And
that's right.
And it goes
Judith,
as well to that strong team line, which is still on the billboards, which is still on the hoardings. And Ben, you are not a spokesperson for the National Party, so I don't mean to put you on the spot for this. You're absolutely not. You were a press secretary under a national government, but you're not and never have been a spokesperson for the National Party. But you're the best we've got. Can you now seriously run a campaign over the remaining, 60 days, in which you say that this is the strong team, this is the deep squad, this is that should take over government at a time where we remain in a crisis? I mean, it is the most hospital of hospital passes, isn't it?
I mean, they could run a line that they're getting stronger per capita every day. That on average, the quality of their MPs is increasing with each passing week.
It's like the line of every person moving to Australia increases the average IQ of both countries.
And look, and I that was really palpable. I think when Judith Collins announced her reshuffle, a lot of attention was paid to Shane Retty's promotion at the expense of Michael Woodhouse. Swift, decisive leadership. And Collins, who had spent the morning sort of decrying diversity politics and saying we're just a meritocracy, then, promoted Māori MPs, and so, got the best of both worlds. But, looking at that shadow cabinet now, with Adams gone, with Nikki Kaye gone, with Bennett gone, it looks much weaker. You've got old hands, quote unquote, from the previous national government. But I don't think anyone would be suggesting that David Bennett, Louise Upston and Jackie Dean were real stars of the Key administration. Particularly, you really see it in the departure of those three, very high profile, very competent former women ministers, and again, all understandable reasons for quitting. But once you take them out as a chunk, it's, like the ship of Theseus. It's very hard to pretend it's still your grandfather's axe when you've replaced the handle and the blade.
But that's kind of what they need now, right? Like, I mean, you look, you as far as that metaphor goes, they should be pushing rejuvenation. Unfortunately, Judith Collins doesn't necessarily represent that. That was more the idea with Muller and Kaye in the leadership. But, look, we saw it after 9 years of Helen Clark. The Parliamentary Party imploded for several years. Now, after, 8 years of John Key, we're seeing the same thing, really, aren't we? Well,
when you're, having to reanimate Nick Smith from his cryo sleep pod that's been orbiting around outer Thorndon for the last 3 years, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, does it?
It is possible by the time we finish this podcast, Nick Smith is the leader of the National Party. We can't be sure.
I just wanted to pick up on what you said, Ben, about the Michael Woodhouse thing and promoting the Māori MPs, because I feel like she's performed a couple of really interesting political sleights of hand over the last week. Judith Collins. So we've heard the whole, we don't believe in diversity, we believe in meritocracy, which obviously speaks to a section of her supporters that don't want to see Māori MPs being promoted and don't see them as adding value, even though you literally have two Harvard graduates and someone who went to Oxford. But at the same time, she has browned up her front bench. And then with the Michael Woodhouse thing, people are saying she stripped him of the health portfolio. Well, yes, but she's given him 2 other great portfolios, so I think she's quite skilled at playing both sides. Some of the language she's used this week, I know, has caused concern, and rightly so. So I think there was a comment she made about we're taking our country back, which has fallen flat with some of our ethnic communities, and some of her comments about not being victimised for her ethnicity and stuff, but that appeals to a section of national voters. So she's quite it's interesting watching how she's playing.
How do you
both
think
sides.
she was on your television program, The Hui, on Sunday morning, where Mihingarangi Forbes asked her how it was that she was demonised as a white person. And she also used the line, I think, in there that she thinks that it should be, it was all New Zealand. One, I don't know if she quite said one law for all, but she was, that's part of her messaging. How do you think she performed under that pressure?
I think by comparison to Muller's performance in the media, that she's absolutely streets ahead of him. Her 18 years of experience shows her, skills as a former lawyer have come to the fore. I think she appears to be answering questions in a fairly straightforward way, even though there is a massive lack of detail around, funding and costing and that sort of thing. So I think certainly she's performed much stronger than Todd Muller did.
I thought watching her on your program and on Q&A and The Nation over the weekend that one of the things that was just very clear, although she was under pressure a lot of times, is she didn't appear to be crippled in the way that others are by the lack of an answer, by racing around in her head, what shall I answer? She can just sort of do something, and she's sort of disarmingly kind of almost... what's the word? She'll sort of smile and go, "Oh, do they?" It's a sort of very.
That's right. She falls back on her humour to get her through some of those sticky situations.
It's kind of on a basic level. It's kind of likable. Like it feels real rather than confected. Obviously now she's in a very different situation to that. But what did you think of that opening round of interviews, Ben? There was also the infrastructure announcement, I suppose, on Friday. All of that. Do you think that she showed that at that point, that things were going to improve?
Yeah, I don't think there's ever been any doubt that she's a much more assured media performer than Bridges or Muller before her. That would have been, I assume, the decisive factor in the caucus choosing her.
We didn't know, to be fair, about Muller because we'd seen so little of him.
That's right. But
seriously, he could have had been a dab hand at it from get go.
Yeah, although
that's what his colleagues thought was going to happen.
It's kind of like those people who say I've always thought I'd be a great writer or novelist, but I've never tried.
Yeah.
I think that.
It's sort of. These are skills. They don't come naturally to anyone. Jacinda Ardern did wow everyone with her initial press conference. But remember, she had been a public figure for, 9 years before that.
You see, you're right, but you also don't know, right? Like, you also don't know. There was nothing, I would say, that if you watch the Auckland Central debates and the Nikki Kay versus Jacinda Ardern, you would say these are both extremely talented politicians. Both have an enormous amount going on for them. You wouldn't have expected that Jacinda Ardern would absolutely, you say that opening press conference and onwards, she's just sort of, she's shown herself to have a leadership abilities that no one necessarily would have picked, whereas Nikki Kay, under the glare of the lights in those first weeks, came up short,
Yeah, look, absolutely. But with Todd
So
Muller,
what I'm saying is Annabelle Lovell has every chance of success.
And we're going to do the first reading.
I
lunchtime.
do think that while it'll be a far more even contest between Judith and Jacinda in the upcoming debates, I do think that Jacinda is a stronger performer in her media interviews, and that it won't be a walk in the park for Judith by any stretch of the imagination. And Jacinda's had 3 years of dealing with some really difficult issues and getting asked some really curly questions by the media on a daily basis, and that sort of daily mileage. It really gets your muscles match fit. So I think, again, Judith is starting on the back foot there.
While Ardern is very good at deflecting difficult questions and reframing them to answer questions she'd prefer to be answering, she also is one of the main attacks that's made of her is that she's not good on detail, which is just wrong. She's very good at detail. She's got a great, you watched her during the COVID crisis and elsewhere, her retention of detail is extraordinary, I think.
It's
and so
Clark-esque.
if that's her weakness, then if that's being targeted as a weakness, then that's a bad strategy. Let's talk about Winston Peters in New Zealand first, which this was meant to be their big weekend. Winston Peters back from the surgeon's table and doing the Winston Peters show, railing at the media, railing at the opposition, even railing at the other parties of government. And he... bopping along to John Farnham as he is wont to do at his conferences lately.
Is John Rawls stuck in Hawaii because of COVID?
It's been John Farnham for a few rounds now, and it's a good tune. You're the voice, Ben. Try and understand it.
Hello there, Simon Pound here from another spin-off podcast with a little bit of cross-promo for you. If you might be into the stories of Aotearoa's most interesting entrepreneurs and innovators, you might like to check out Business is Boring, the podcast I host that reckons it's anything but. Recent episodes have included great guests like Tim Brown from Allbirds, Kiri Nathan from her own label, and Brianne West with the amazing story of Ethy. If that sounds like a bit of you, it's available through the spin-off or wherever you find your favourite podcasts.
Every time New Zealand first go on the show for elections, there's just such a sort of greatest hits feel about it. It's like Jordan Luck parading up and down the East Coast at New Year's. You know all the words. 1,000 more police. Apparently, in addition to the 1,000 more police that he guaranteed after the last election, just what's a good figure? We need 1,000 more. We're just about there. Cut immigration to 15,000. I think at the last election it was about 20,000 or something. Obviously, immigration's about 0 now, so that's one win chalked up for them. And this is the sort of chutzpah of the New Zealand First Party, right? Promising to cut immigration when there is literally no immigration happening. Yeah. It's just so predictable. And the only thing that's changed this time is that he's got a bunch of sort of jam-mouthed, sticky, toffee-handed, public school blazer wearing, Beano reading, conker playing, Groucho Club fucking weirdos dubbed the bad boys of Brexit who have come in to do his social media
just embarrassing.
and
turn the election into a Viz comic.
It's just embarrassing. What a bunch of plonkers! You sort of feel bad for Winston, like he may even have been played by these absolute vile plonkers. They're just completely disingenuous, PR-seeking liars.
I think it is really revealing, though, of how unsettled and how at risk he is feeling, that you would reach out to an organisation like that, to a group of people like that, to do your memes, your Twitter memes is quite telling, I think, and I think he knows that he's at risk in a way that he hasn't been at risk before. And as you say, Ben, although the immigration card is, you could argue, has always come up trumps for him because he always gets returned to Parliament. Never in the history of New Zealand, I think, has anyone ever given less fucks about immigration than what we do right now. So the fact that
apart from returning New Zealanders,
and except for the fact that for a large number of people, the immigration cry is really just a dog whistle for xenophobia. So it's not really for some people about immigration.
Yeah, but
it's about Queen Street being full of Chinese people.
But that he is calling on it this time when he knows that, immigration isn't an issue, instead of, like basically claiming to be the head of stoperations in Parliament, instead of pointing to your achievements over the last 3 years when you've been in charge of the PGF. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm confused about what the strategy is there.
Their voters have always been oppositional. That they always like Winston standing against things rather than for things. And that's just been sort of concretised into their current strategy.
Okay, but for all that, the New Zealand First Party won 7.2% of the popular vote, at the last election. And they have surely, for the people that supported them, overachieved. They have achieved, if you look at the impact in cabinet, the impact of Provincial Growth Fund, the things they've stopped, but also the things they've started, 1 billion trees, whatever. You listen to Winston Peters giving his speech on Sunday and you go, isn't this, under MMP, if a party achieves a disproportionate amount of its manifesto to its election, surely that is a success? Surely the system working should be that New Zealand First should be riding high in the polls at the moment. I mean,
I don't think they're good at telling their own story, though, in that regard.
Or maybe MMP doesn't work, in that regard. It is a difficult one, whereas the Greens are playing a much more measured path. But Winston Peters held up in interviews and in that speech Audrey Young's report card on their achievements in government, and it's a glowing report card.
Oh, look, if you compare their achievements to the Greens, who, struggling in the polls, but probably very little likelihood they'll drop under 5% on election day, I think. You just compare the Provincial Growth Fund to the Green Investment Bank. The Green Investment Bank was $100 million set aside to lend on green investment projects that had to be on commercial terms and had to have a business case that stacked up. And I think they did that.
And did nothing for a year and a half.
And has only just gotten its first loan out the door.
Yep.
The Provincial Growth Fund is $3 billion, 30 times as much for Shane Jones to just give to his friends in the regions. Just disclaimer, I mean his friends in the regions as in he's a friend of people in the regions.
He's a friend of the regions.
Not he's giving it to his friends in a corrupt way.
He's a friend of success.
Please don't sue me like Joyce did the NBR. The disparity between what New Zealand First have achieved and what the Greens have achieved, and then New Zealand First tanking in the polls, whereas versus the Greens, dropping but probably still safe, is actually pretty extraordinary. But I think it speaks to the psychology of New Zealand First voters, which is that maybe it is an over-promising thing. New Zealand First's real promise is not that it'll plant 1 billion trees, or that it will change regulations around timber processing, or that it will develop projects in the regions. It's that it will make everything the same as it was in your youth, that you remember while you're sitting at the TAB, nursing a pint, remembering when you had a job in your small town.
I don't think it's an accident that the slogan they unveiled on Sunday begins with the word "back." I genuinely don't. Some people misread it as "back to the future," but it was "back your future." But I don't think that was some malapropism on their part. I think you're back. They mean let's go back to, to 1975 when everything was right and proper, and that's the best way to understand the New Zealand First.
Yeah, days when Chris Trotter used to say New Zealand was utopia.
Pavlova Paradise.
Yeah.
Annabelle, but he was also, just one other thing on Uncle Winston, is that he did a good job when he covered maternity leave as Prime Minister. All the predictions of carnage or self-serving. He's not the narcissist that some people would play him as, I don't think, or didn't prove himself in that. Then under the COVID crisis, he played a firm hand, did a whole lot of work. The people say he did great work overseeing the repatriations and dealing with foreign governments. He's been he's done a good job as foreign minister. I don't know. I guess the problem for them now, when you think about the COVID crisis as well, is that it makes it harder to do that kind of we're going to go rogue and just let loose on everybody. And so they've gone instead for the strategy, and it was there in his speech on Sunday, of an insurance policy, which is another word for the handbrake, which is the pitch is in a way, and it works for Winston and New Zealand First in this regard. If National is basically out of the picture, Labour is going to be the government. We've said this before on this pod, and so their line will be. And he talked about tax a lot on Sunday as well, which is that if you want an insurance policy on these red-green crazies, what did John Key call them? The devil beast. Do you remember that?
Oh,
that
yes,
was a good
the
one.
devil beast.
The devil beast. Anyway, do you think he's got a shot with that?
I mean, you can absolutely never count him out, can you? Because time and time again, he, polls low and then he gets back into Parliament. I think, he's had two things go against him this time. One, I think, is the New Zealand First Foundation scandal, which, on the face of things looks a little funky. And so that certainly hasn't helped, and nor did the way he, responded to that in terms of the whole, photographing of journalists and so on. That definitely is funky. And it's yet to be resolved. I think the other thing is that even though from all accounts he did an incredible job during COVID in terms of repatriating New Zealanders, he fell out of the view of the public, and Jacinda was there every day.
Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson beside her.
Doing an incredible job.
Yep.
And, when you look around what's happening in the world now, my God, we are so lucky to be in the position that we're in.
I think that's a great point.
And those things have counted against him. And I think, too, that there has been the perception that that while New Zealand First, you're right, Ben, that, they're into oppositional politics, I do think that people aren't really in the mood for stopping stuff other than COVID at the moment. I think Judith's ascension will hurt New Zealand First because she's a tough guy too, and I think people will probably be keen to throw their bets in behind her this time around. I also think that it's going to hurt ACT as well with Judith leading National. So I mean, you can never ever say that he's out for the count. And again, what you're saying, Ben, about their report card, that is because he's such a skilled MMP politician. He knows how to get all the runs on the board. Who knows? I think I do. Having said all of that, it feels like there's a different mood in the air this time around, and I think they will have to work very hard to get back. And I think it's a shame that they didn't spend more time this term really cultivating a strong seat for themselves. And I'm not convinced that Shane will get over the line in Northland.
There's zero chance Shane Jones will in Northland. I think there will be a lot of media attention on Shane Jones in Northland. And
Not sure about the maths of that.
Chloe Swarbrick in Auckland Central, and I think neither of them will get close. I think it is interesting that probably Winston the perverse incentives of politics seem to show that the two times that Winston Peters has acted most statesmanlike and contributed the most to this country in the last couple of years are probably the two things that have hurt his party the most. The first is post-Christchurch, going with the government on its gun reform, which gave ACT an opening. That was really what kick-started ACT's rise to the stratospheric levels of 2 to 3% in some polls. Which was getting that gun lobby on board, the gun activists who opposed those reforms. And that would normally be a pretty strong New Zealand First constituency. The second thing is, being so constructive and working so well in the COVID environment where, at a time when New Zealand First were really gearing up their oppositional stuff before the pandemic hit, showed the government functioning well as a unit in the best interests of New Zealand. But, that's right, New Zealand First receded back into the background. So, not saying that they would have been on 5% in the absence of those two things, because we've got to remember that, every time New Zealand First has been in government before, they have failed to clear the 5% threshold.
Yep.
And you can say there were different circumstances in those times, such as an SFO investigation
It's also
in
the first time
2008. But in a
they've
way,
made it-
some of these circumstances are exactly
First time
the
they've
same.
made it through to the end of the government. I mean, it's 3 weeks to go.
That,
right?
That's
So
true. First time he's made it through with his ministerial warrants intact.
Yeah. I'm not sure I totally agree with your 0% prognostication on Northland, but we will talk about that seat and Auckland Central in the weeks to come. Now that we are a weekly podcast, just quickly before we go, the announcement on Sunday, Jerry Brownlee issued a statement saying that the National Party in government would impose a $3,000 fee for returning New Zealanders in quarantine and self-isolation. And then in very quick time afterwards, Megan Woods, who oversees that as part of her portfolio, said that the existing government was pretty much into doing the same thing, which made me wonder whether or not they both had been polling on this particular issue and seen some pretty overwhelming numbers of people going, yeah, they fuckers should pay, the fuckers should pay. But does this not play to the meanest part of New Zealand? We are meant to be all in this together. It's a public health measure. It's a sacrifice, not a privilege, to be put in 2 weeks. Yep, some people have good luck and end up in the Pullman and have a nice time, but it's not... Is this... What do you think, Annabelle? It seems a bit mean-minded to me.
I think, be that as it may, in terms of it being mean-spirited, that's probably out of step with the way the rest of New Zealand is feeling. I work in Newton, just off K Road, and I walk along K Road, and I've never seen so many beggars and homeless people as I do now, including people sleeping on mattresses outside of the Cordis. And I think...
Apart from that one guy who is in self-isolation, according to Michael Woodhouse.
That's right. So I think a lot of New Zealanders will be seeing the same thing now, that wave of the second wave of homelessness that groups like LifeWise talked about, and they'll be wondering that why is it that we have New Zealanders sleeping on the streets when we have people coming back into the country, staying at the Pullman and not having to make a financial contribution to it. I do wonder if perhaps there needs to be a more nuanced approach whereby if you're a returning New Zealand citizen who is planning to stay permanently and get a job, start a business, whatever, that they are charged or not charged in a different way to someone who may be just returning back for a funeral or that sort of thing. But I do understand why New Zealanders are feeling a sense of frustration that, in an ongoing housing crisis, unemployment soaring, beggars on the street, why people who are returning aren't making a financial contribution to their time in quarantine.
Yeah, I think it's a terrible policy. If there's one birthright you have of being a New Zealander, or maybe not a birthright, a citizenship right, if you get citizenship through a means other than birth, it's that you're allowed to be in New Zealand. You can always come home. The quarantine is in order to stop the spread of the virus. It's something that we do to people who are returning to the country. People don't like the analogy with prison, but I think the analogy is fair in the sense that it is something we are requiring people to do. You don't have a choice. You have to be there for 2 weeks. I think that it's completely wrong to charge New Zealanders for that. I think it's the worst instincts of both the National and Labour parties, probably playing to the worst instincts of New Zealanders. I mean, this debate has brought out the two worst strains of the New Zealand persona to me. The first is the kind of narrow-minded tall poppy provincialism, which says, who are these flash Harrys coming back from overseas that think they're so great? They weren't here when we were toughing it out in lockdown with a team of 5 million, and now they want to, come back and exploit Hobbiton or whatever, and the other strain, which is people coming from overseas going, everyone's just jealous because we wanted to make something of our lives.
It certainly didn't help that there were people.
I hate all of them. But
people complaining about their food arriving a little bit late didn't really help, did it? I mean, I think that's what's informed.
People complaining about being taken to Rotorua and stuff, but I think it depends also on how you look at it. Like, to me, that's a very individual approach, whereas I think, if you're coming back to rejoin the team of 5 million, no mai haere mai, but we all have a contribution that we've had to make to that. So I don't think it should be like roll up with your visa and pay $3,000, but I do think there needs to be a nuanced approach so that the financial burden of dealing with COVID is spread fairly amongst the team of 5 million.
Why don't we actually use Hobbiton and put up some of those, those like kind of really quick, you can buy those things that you put on a trailer and they're basically little huts. Just sprinkle Hobbiton with
like
welcome
teepees.
little pads. No, you know what I mean. Like those. You don't need a permit for them. You can just put them on and then it's like a little sleep out. Like
I told you about my
right?
last trip to Whakatane, right?
Sleep outs there, long drops. And then if you want to stay in the Pullman or something like that, you can pay to top it up. There we go.
I just think that, when whānau weren't able to bury their dead and have tangihanga and go through that process, being asked to contribute to your quarantine is really not that great a sacrifice. Of course it would, you have to look at the wider circumstances, but if you're coming back for a funeral, I don't see why you shouldn't have to koha. Alas, all ladies.
The only other thing on that, we should probably wrap this up quickly, is that I was surprised that the Greens haven't had anything to say about this. It seems like they're also. I thought this was a bit of an open goal for the Greens when you've got National and Labour both going, we're going to nail you with $3,000 fines. I felt like a Russell Norman back in the day would have leapt out of the traps to say this is an objectionable policy. We're all in this together. We should all support one another. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, that's a particularly strange one, especially because a number of people have pointed out to me that they're worried the Green vote that traditionally does very well with overseas voters may fall this year because of the international profile and pride in Jacinda Ardern, and this would be a great way to reconnect with
They've
those
typically
young
picked up another seat, haven't they?
Green voters overseas. If cruel Prime Minister Ardern wants to charge them $3,000 to come back. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, which I think is actually the biggest announcement of the last couple of days, was the government's decision announced yesterday that they're going to basically stow away $14 billion of the $20 billion that was appropriated for the COVID response. So when an appropriation is made in a budget, that's an authority to spend. It means that the government can raise that money, or if they already have that money,
they hadn't
spend it.
Borrowed the money, but they were given Parliament's sign-off to borrow
the money. Yep. And what they've said is they're basically not going to seek that $14 billion on overseas markets or whatever, or by printing money on the Reserve Bank, and they're instead going to leave that in reserve for if there's a second bout of community transmission, another lockdown, or an evolving response. Now, two things there. One, shows that there's still a commitment to sort of, reasonably sound fiscal management. If you can't think of a good way to spend the money which is going to add value to the economy, it's probably a good idea not to spend it. Second thing, really cuts National's lunch in the sense that National were probably primed to spend $20 billion in their promises. And we saw that with, the $31 billion infrastructure announcement on Friday with, sort of slightly shifty costings towards the latter end.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. There's a strategy I like to call rope-a-dope, which is where you show extreme fiscal caution for the first few years of your term, and then the opposition demands that you spend more money, and then once you start spending money during election year, they can't complain. And here, Robertson did that, at the beginning of end of last year with the big infrastructure announcement, and now he's sort of pulled it back, And after kind of luring National into themselves trying to outspend and talking about the debt, which is a huge message that National have been pushing, which is, how are we going to pay back this $40 billion worth of debt? This is a debt for the future generations. And now Labour is saying, well, actually, we're getting rid of a third of it. So, ball's in your court. So, I mean, I think primarily good fiscal management, but secondly, pretty canny politics from Grant Robertson.
Sticking his heel on the hose, right, of spending, but also showing here is prudence. It's the old kind of Gordon Brown approach that was meant to spike the guns of those who would attack them, not for being prudent. That's what he's put himself up for. Annabelle, do you have anything to add to the end of this podcast, which is now limping towards its conclusion? But don't worry, next week we'll be back to talk about the new National Party leader, Mark Mitchell, after his rebranding as the Easter Bunny. So do join us then. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Flip Electric. Thank you very much, Annabelle. Thank you very much, Ben. I hope you don't have COVID. I'm Toby Manhire, and we'll catch up soon.
Should everyone become spin-off members so that we can become podcast millionaires and buy a helicopter?
That's a great point, Ben. Thank you for once again shilling for the good people, spin-off members. I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.